Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brenden Pugh. Today we have Philip Davis with us. He has written a book called Nemesis and the Vault of Lost Time. And so we're just going to chat today and talk about the book and his process and those kinds of things. So, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be part of it. Super excited to hear about this opportunity, and looking forward to kind of digging into the writing process with your audience.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let's just kind of start with, who are you? What do you do? What have you written? Um, you know, how'd you get into writing? All that kind of stuff.
That's a great question. Writing's kind of always been, we talked about this a little bit in the queue up here before the show. Writing's always been in my blood. I started off at the tender age of, I don't know, maybe about 25 or 26, starting a full service advertising and marketing agency, which I was probably too young to realize what I was getting into. I was foolishly brave, jumped into it with both feet. And for about 17 years, I did ad copy, marketing, down in the Tampa Bay area of Florida. I ended up tripping across this company that was just starting out at the time with an idea, and I helped them with their marketing. They had a horrible name called Portables that sounded like toilets, and the person could not sell their product. They had 70 boxes, and they said, "Please help me. I can't see. My goal is to get to 100 of these boxes. Can you help me, Mr. Advertising Guy?" So I thought about it and I said, with a name like Portables, it sounds like toilets. You're not going to go anywhere. So maybe you should rebrand it. And he said, "What should we call it?" And I said, "What if you call it Pods, Portable On Demand Storage?" And at the time, he was like, just not so sure I want to do that. I've got 70 of these boxes and I just painted them. But he bit the bullet. He named them Pods. And then that started my second career, which was I got a reputation for just naming things. So I've
Yeah.
named about 500 companies, products, and services globally. And in all of that creation mode of creating brand identities, I had inside me this idea that maybe I could take some of that energy and apply it someday to a book.
Yeah, that's super cool. So the pods containers, is that what you're talking about?
That's
Those
the pods containers.
that's
Yes, I have one in my driveway. We're moving the next couple of weeks, so
yeah.
it's come full circle. So I think there's hundreds of thousands of them now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, it's I love how you said you're young and foolish enough to jump into something. I feel like that's we all have that moment in our life where like, yeah, I can do this, and then
What was I thinking?
you get into it and you're like, "Uh-oh." you know.
Uh-oh, I guess I got to make the best of it.
Yeah. So how did
Yeah.
you then kind of transition into writing your book and getting into that, like when did the idea come to you where you're like, "Hey, I should write this," and
Yeah.
then actually doing it?
That's a funny question. I would say I had this writing thing. I always was as a college student. I had this fanciful idea that I'd be a writer someday. I was kind of into Hemingway, and I just love that short, concise, emotive kind of writing style that he had. And I thought maybe I'd write a novel, kind of a classic one. And I had spent some time doing youth service work with the YMCA down in Peru and had a lot of experiences young doing some crazy stuff. And I thought maybe that would be a novel I would write, some young man traveling abroad kind of novel. But as I got older, I thought my real roots were I'm always a kid at heart. My wife always says I've never grown up. And I
We
have this
never grow
imagine.
up, we just get older.
Don't you love how they say that men don't mature mentally until they're like, it keeps going up from 25, I think it's to 35 now. And I
Yeah,
question whether that ever happens.
right.
So I was just always this imaginative sprout, and I had this idea, and I wanted to go back and kind of reawaken that gene in young, especially young boys. And I don't think they get enough attention these days. They're a little overlooked. They're lost. And I thought I want to reawaken that desire to read and to imagine and to invention and to wonder. And I thought, what if you just created a fantastical novel in the spirit of Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, just a fantastical world that would really kind of stir kids and kind of reinvigorate them to have that desire to read. So as I began to play with this idea, about the time I started this second career in brand development, probably about 15 years ago, I had this wild idea hit me of this story, and it kind of sat for the last 10 or 15 years in the background.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think that's maybe why I love how you talk about that because I recently I'm in my mid 30s now, and in the last couple of years have been kind of rethinking about like, I'm not as creative as I don't feel as creative as I used to when I was younger, and so it's kind of that, how do you get out of the weight of the world to
Yes.
rediscover that creativity? And I think that's why one of the reasons like Harry Potter was so huge is because
Yes.
she tapped into something that was like, what if there was like this crazy world
Yeah.
behind our world, you know?
Right, right. I think we all lust for that, and I will use that strong of a word. It's a desire to say, and my book really is, and I've always been a little bit of a, and I don't really appreciate labels for somebody that creates labels for everybody else. But I've always had a little bit of a metaphysical bent that I believe that all of these, all of our attempt, whether it's spiritual or something, is to connect to something a little beyond ourselves. And I think there's this sense, that's why there's so many of these books like that there are realms. There's realms beyond us that we don't really understand, but they're intriguing, and it's fun to explore possibility.
Hmm.
The what if in the world. When I was a kid, I used to always ask my mom what if till she just about went crazy. She used to call me the what if kid. So I just kind of leaned into that when I wrote this book. What if there was this thing? And what if it led to this door? And what if you opened that door and you went into this portal world? And what would that world look like?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I actually been thinking recently. I think a lot of the reason why a lot of media right now, like movies and TVs and shows and things like that, aren't really connecting with people is I think we've delved too much into realism.
Yes.
We're like, I've said this many times on my channel about part of the reason I love Lord of the Rings is because it's something I can escape to, and it gives me something to aspire to.
Yes.
It doesn't
Yes.
remind me of my real life, and all of the
Yes.
stuff we have to deal with. I actually
Right.
can escape to it, and so I
Yeah.
think that's, yeah, I love it.
Yeah, yeah. I think we all have that place. Well, one of the things that inspired me is and I think we all have these some version of this. We're not all fortunate to have maybe grandparents or that one person, but we've got someone in our mind that we went to. I think both in our mental world and our physical world. And for me, I would go to my grandma's house, and she had this garage that was this quirky old house, and out of the kitchen, there's this weird door. Instead of going to a closet, it went up these mysterious stairs to just a little area above the garage. It was like a little reading room. I've never seen it in another house. It's just this quirky little room. But man, that was my getaway. And you
Hmm.
could grab a book, and for me, it was always like the old Reader's Digest or something. I would grab something and I would curl up there and just read. And you create for yourself kind of a cocoon or a little mental bubble. And to your point, it's an escape,
Hmm.
right? And I think just like when we sleep, we have deep sleep to restore our bodies. I think we need those escapes to restore our minds.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we definitely need something that, again, like aspires us to be better than what we are and that we can escape to. And it's almost a healing in a way. It's like,
I think so. Restorative.
mhm,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So, so you mentioned you kind of, the idea just kind of came to you and then you were, let it kind of sit for a while. Is that just because you were unsure of how to start going about it, or you just kind of didn't know where, like you just thought you'd let it mature for a little bit? Kind of how did that happen? Like, take us from you had the idea to like, I'm going to write this thing.
Okay, that's a great question. And it's a little fuzzy for me. And I know this is probably not helpful for somebody aspiring to write because there's different kinds of writers. There's
Hmm.
planners and pantsters, they call them. And planners plan their books, and pantsters fly by the seat of their pants. And I was more of a pantster in that I don't know exactly the moment I had the originating thought. And I don't know if it was the plot that pulled me in or the character, but I just had this idea that came to me, And again, where do ideas come from? I think they come from, not to be weird, but from the unmanifest. Everything that's physical came from somewhere beyond physicality. Before, the world's greatest building probably started with two people scratching out a rectangle on a napkin in a restaurant, right?
Hmm.
So this moment came to me, and I felt it's almost like you follow an impulse. The impulse comes first, which is you feel this creative flow inside you, and it wants to express itself. And I thought it's got to be about a young man's adventure. I really felt moved to write something for young boys. And again, it was kind of autobiographical in that I was this inquisitive young kid that always got kind of quashed a little bit. I was always wondering, and everybody would kind of just comport, please, just do your thing. Don't wonder, stay on task. And I had this quirk when I was growing up, and then I sneezed a lot because I was triggered by sunlight. I found out that that was an actual physical condition, that 23% of the world has this, where if you feel a sneeze coming on, you look towards light, it triggers these little hairs in your nose, and you sneeze.
Hmm.
And this idea dropped in, what if that is kind of a moment where you're kind of unconscious, right? It's just like waking up in the morning, you're not
Hmm.
quite there. You go to sneeze, and then this idea that why do people say God bless you when you sneeze? Why do you
Hmm.
need to be blessed by God? And why do people in Germany say Gesundheit? And then I started looking things up, and it was like it's all the same. God help you, God bless you. So this idea just kind of came, from wherever these ideas come from, that maybe there's a moment where there's a glitch in the universe, where you have a moment of unconsciousness or semi-consciousness, you're in the ether. And if that's so, what was it back in the medieval days that they sensed that had to be sealed, almost like cauterize it, something open, and then you have to say, God bless you. Well,
Hmm.
I thought life force just got sucked out somehow.
Hmm.
And that's when this idea started to develop, that maybe there was this realm where there's these time thieves that are using your most unconscious moments to seize, like bankers stealing, but just pennies at a time so you'll never miss it from your account.
Hmm.
But they're hoarding the collective amounts of this time in a vault in another world so that those people can ingest it and become, sentient.
Hmm.
So as I began to sit with this, the ideas just started flooding me.
Yeah.
And the book kind of came to me in a torrent.
Hmm. Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, it's so interesting how kind of the idea for I've not published any of my writing. I'm working on it. Um
Yeah.
and so but the idea for me came from I was working in a factory the factory's called Bun-O-Matic. They make bun coffee pots. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Those are famous.
Yeah,
Those are
so
Gatsby.
I was working at the factory, and so my whole job was take this part and take this part, put it on a spot welder and hit the button for
Right.
8 hours a day.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
so as a creative type, this really freed my brain up to because I'm not
Yes.
having to think about what I'm doing. And so that same thing, it just kind of all of a sudden just appeared back here somewhere. And then I
Yes.
had a few years to sit with that and come up with it. And now I'm like 10, 15 years later and I'm still figuring it all out. But
Well, that took me the same time, Brendan. I think
mhm.
that's sometimes you talk about, a badge of honor. That's kind of the badge of shame. Like, why is it taking so long? But I wouldn't beat yourself up over that. It
Yeah,
it comes when it comes.
yeah, I've definitely kind of taken the stance now. I was just talking with the last person I talked to about this, where I me and my wife, we have a daughter, she's 9, and
Yeah.
we're in our mid 30s, and we've got careers, and our daughter's in all sorts of stuff, and like my wife just started a new business, and so it's kind of like we're just in that season of life where it's accepting,
Oh,
like we just
yeah.
maybe I'll write them and publish them when I'm in my 40s, like
Yeah.
do the best you can, but you have to accept that those times in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what I call those? I call the 30s the blur years,
Hmm.
because they're very enriching in the sense that, I mean, you notice in your 20s, it's like, who am I going to become, or what's my purpose? As if you've got this huge menu. And you remember the game of life. If I wait, I can take this path, become a doctor, or become a mechanic. But
Hmm.
in your 30s, game on.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not thinking about those things anymore because you're embracing life in its fullest. But at the same time, you're gonna look back when you hit your 40s and go, "What the heck was that all about?"
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah. I saw a great quote about something. I don't, this isn't exact, but it was something about like your 30s is almost the hardest time in your life because you're working on your career, you're trying to do whatever
yeah,
side hustle that you actually care about. You're
right,
also raising kids and you're maybe
yeah,
newly married and you just bought a house and nobody's
yeah.
telling you how to do it.
No,
You know?
no, and you're an imposter the entire time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If anyone finds you out, you do not know how to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I recently did a career day at our middle school here where we live, and the I walked in and it was quite a few people I know. We're in a small town, so we know it's easy to know most everybody. But I just said, all these kids are about to find out that we're all just faking it till we make it. you
I
know?
know, I know.
Yeah.
But our parents knew. We knew our parents knew, but we're all fakers,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure every generation goes through that.
Yeah.
But you know what? Those years that you even now aren't a waste because it's enriching you. Every life experience raising your kids, the business that you're doing, it's going to be another piece that you can use in feathering those stories out later on.
Yeah. Well, and it's ultimately led to, I feel like I have plenty of time. The way I've kind of turned it in my head is I have plenty of time to come up with ideas.
Yeah.
So, I'm constantly able to reevaluate my stories and kind of work on the outlines and come up with some new ideas and find a new. I just texted my brother the other day and was like, I just thought of this great thing, that
Yeah.
I could put in it, but because not putting the pressure on it to I have to get this done by the time
Yeah.
I'm whatever. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's different schools of thought, and there's a quite a bit, and I'm not saying they're wrong at all, but there's a school of thought that you just pound it out every day, whether you feel like it or not. It's almost treating like writing like exercise. You don't have to like it, but you got to get up and give me 20 push-ups every day.
Mhm.
That just hasn't been my experience. I'm sure if I did that, it would just produce a different kind of product.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be more mechanical. Maybe it'd be more productive in terms of volume. If you're looking to be a prolific writer,
Mhm.
that's probably the way to go about it. But I was always, I wait for moments of inspiration where it really comes. And then I save the hard work for more the mechanical things like, oh, it needs some editing.
Yeah.
So, but I don't try to push through the plot mechanically like hard.
Yeah.
Like wait for it. And sometimes what I do is I'll take a pause and I'll say, what does this story want to say? Instead
Mhm.
of what do I want to write? It's not about me. I look at myself as I'm a conduit of a story that's coming in and through me.
Mhm.
Well, what does that story want to say? And as best I can, I try to get out of the way of the story and let
Yeah,
it just kind of come through.
for sure. Yeah, it's kind of that idea of the sculptor, you're just uncovering the thing that's already there. You're just finding
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yes. And that
Yeah.
takes some pressure off.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reading a book. Do you know who Cal Newport is? He wrote
I'm not
he writes nonfiction stuff. He wrote a book called Deep Work, and
okay.
anyways, he wrote a book that I'm reading right now called Slow Productivity, and kind of what he's talking about in there is this idea of like that. This is a very general, broad overview of it, but like essentially, is it worth? Do you is it worth quantity or do you want quality? So,
Yes.
do you want to write a bunch of books? Do you want to make a bunch of art pieces, or do you want
Yeah.
to spend your life creating one or two or three things that are truly great? You know,
Right.
like
Right.
Lord of the
That's
Rings is
good.
a great example.
Yeah.
It took Tolkien how long to write those? He wrote all this other stuff that got published later,
Yeah.
but he really mostly created the book that is the Lord of the Rings
Right.
and the Hobbit. So, and look at how lasting of an impact that's had.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, qualitative, quantitative. That's the decision authors are make. And some people, it's just a career.
Hmm.
So, one of the things I kept reading about is, there's so much just flim flam stuff about, it will help you as an author, da 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 da. And one of the biggest tips was just give away your first book. Give away your first book.
Hmm.
And my thought was, well, how am I going to do that? That's the only book I have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, how about it's a good transition into process. So, where do you? So we kind of talked about ideas, and this particular idea just kind of came to you over a course of time. Um, but I guess maybe the extension of that is, where do you have any plans going forward? Is there a sequel or anything like that? And if not, do you have some other ideas that are separate? And then how are you going to go forward now about developing them and getting them put together?
Yeah, that's a great question, and of course, I'm being that the book is out now. I'm getting asked that a lot. Let me just plug in my cord here in two
Mm,
seconds, so we can continue on.
yeah.
I originally no, I was just I guess it's like and I shouldn't venture into talking about things I don't know because I'm not a lady, but I can only imagine having your first child. Everybody goes, "Are you thinking about more?"
Yeah.
And that first child, that's probably not what you're thinking about.
Right.
Like, how am I going to get through this first one without dying? Um, so the first one was all about the story itself. As I got towards the end, I thought, does this lead or lend itself to a further story? And I became convinced that it did.
Hmm.
So I left little clues at the end. They say never leave people with a complete cliffhanger because it's not satisfying.
Yeah.
But I left a little clue at the end of this book, which would indicate that there's yet more to be kind of unpacked. So I could see this being 2 to 3 books.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways that people can go about that. I think there's some who they just write a book. They don't really think that there's going to be anything after it. And then maybe a few years later, they go, oh, maybe I do have another
Yeah,
idea about
right.
that. I think there's others. I'm more in this camp where I have a bunch of ideas and sequels and like it's kind of all planned out as a series.
Yeah, right.
But then I think that's that middle ground there where it's like, I don't know if there's something here, but I think there is. And
Yeah,
so we'll leave this clue here and we'll leave this and
right.
we'll because I think I
Right.
agree with you. It keeps it satisfying where it's like you can just read this and
Yep,
it is satisfying, but whenever the
right.
next one comes out, it does lead into, you know,
Yeah. And I
more.
think it helps too to get some feedback. I definitely had a certain direction in mind that if I continued, but I have one character in my book who's a surprise hit. He's one of the time bandits.
Hmm.
His name is Humphreys, and I imagine him as a little bit of an Englishman.
Hmm.
But he's got a very specific sense of humor, and several people have read the book and go, "Well, I hope you write another book, and I hope he's in it." And I'm thinking, oh, okay, well that's good feedback because I wasn't sure if he was going to be in it, but now backed by popular demand,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Maybe there's a spin-off of just him. Maybe there's something
right,
there.
almost like a sitcom. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
yeah,
So how do you so you mentioned you're kind of more of a pantser. I've been a heavy outliner. I've also been a pantser and I've kind of come to the middle of I'm a
yeah.
little bit of both. So where do you kind of do you outline everything? Do you just kind of write it and edit it later?
Okay, so far in the panster category that I
Mhm.
almost can't talk about planning. I think it just speaks to the way my mind works. But it's almost like I write to a point and I'm discovering the work as I'm writing it, which
Mhm.
seems weird. At one point in this story, I shocked myself, or I should say, the story shocked me. I was typing and the nemesis the most horrible character in this book accuses somebody of something, and I'm just typing along and something comes out and it just was so shocking to me. I just stopped
Mhm.
and I was like, oh my god, this can't be true.
Mhm.
And so then I just go to the keyboard and I go, it's almost like I'm questioning the story along with the story. Well,
Yeah.
how could that? Oh, now it's making sense to me.
Mhm.
And then I start to type. Now there's edits that go on. I'm not saying that you write it and it's perfect. I think when you kind of go through an inspirational process, there's a lot more cleanup on aisle 5,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot more trimming, and you've got to go back and then look at things. When you structurally look ahead and you kind of see where it's going, you can control things more: pacing, timing, rhythm, all those things. When it comes to you in kind of a flood of inspiration, you've got to clean it up.
Mhm.
because you'll have a tendency. It's like the horse returning back to the barn. It starts to gallop. You'll
Hmm.
start to kind of rush some things that then need to be kind of slowed down and filled out. Does that make more
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I've kind of heard some things I've heard before, kind of like if you do outline, that first outline is kind of like your first draft, where you're
Yeah.
basically writing the book, you're just not writing the prose essentially.
Right.
But you know, if you just pants it the whole way, then there's a lot of cleanup that has to
A
happen.
lot.
Yeah. I
A
think
lot.
I kind of end up, what I've found is even if you out like, because like mine's a fantasy series that's gotten fairly extensive. And so I kind of went really heavy into the outlining. And what I
Yeah.
found with that was that no matter how much I outlined it, that same thing would happen where I would be writing and then I would write something that kind of shocked me or didn't fit with the
Yes.
outline. And so no
Right.
matter how hard I tried to plan it and
Yep.
outline, my creativity still went somewhere. And then I was like, well, crap, I got to go back and fix
Yes.
the
Well,
outline.
what the old saying, life is what happens while you're planning other things.
Hmm.
I think writing is that same thing, and if you don't go with that inspiration, I think you lose something.
Hmm.
And I think some of the best stories that are told are ones that are come from a very organic place because that's how life is: unexpected,
Hmm.
messy, twisty, turny. It's not plotted and methodical. It's spontaneous. Having said that, that takes a lot more work.
Hmm.
So I understand the ability. And if you just, and again, it's what do you want as an author? Are you saying I'm going to write a kids mystery series and it's going to have 7 novels and they're all going to involve a hotel?
Hmm.
I mean, you can construct things and create, I think, a satisfying product for an audience.
Yeah.
But it's just what's in your heart. What are you trying to get out of the writing process? What is your reward? And you just have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I kind of ended up in the middle where so like one of the things that helps me a lot is knowing where I'm going. So I generally have like, I know where it starts and I know the ending. And
Yeah.
then I have a few scene ideas in the middle, you
Right.
know. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of the exploratory part is like, okay, I know I'm here and I want to get to here. So how do I connect
Yeah.
that, string of
Right.
thoughts?
Right. The other thing that's interesting is, this idea, and I think for some people this is probably a daunting thing, but I think good works have more than one plot.
Hmm.
There's a primary and secondary, and you'll see this in sitcom writing and everything. There's this overarching arch. Here's the conflict, but there's this simmering other issue,
Hmm.
and I think that's what gives it that interest and that complexity. That it's not so linear.
Hmm.
They're doing it for a primary reason, but they've got a secondary reason as well,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I think, kind of again back to movies and TV, I think that's why a lot of things right now aren't working. I just started watching a show. It's called Tracker. I don't even know
Okay.
what it's on, but it's just a normal network show. So it's not like a
Yeah.
streaming show. And I was like, man, the first episode happened, and it's kind of a procedural show. So it's like, um, it's not really a cop procedural, but it's basically that where the guy has like there's kind of the baddie of the week kind of thing,
Yeah. Right.
um, which is great on its own. But then right in the very first episode, they kind of add this like little sub thing that he's dealing with personally.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
kind of
It's
the through
involved.
line that's going to happen
Yeah.
throughout multiple episodes. And the moment I
Right.
saw that, I was like, man, this is what a lot of these streaming shows and stuff are missing. Like they just don't
Yeah.
have this. Yes, there's this is the plot, it's happening, but this is
Yes.
what's really happening underneath.
Right. And it's just lays there festering, not quite resolved.
Hmm.
Right. So, you've got this thing, in my book, my editor, I give her credit. She says, I think there's a layer to this you haven't explored, but it's going to require a price from you. And the price is that the protagonist can't just save the world. That's nice. That's
Hmm.
wonderful. Right. But what is the personal involvement in this story? And as
Hmm.
I went back and began to explore it, I realized that if this is truly an autobiographical novel, that there was an emptiness in this child that I experienced through the loss of my father
Hmm.
at a young age. And so I wrote this as kind of a subtext to his journey to go and confront these global issues. There is also a personal one in trying um, to understand injustice, to understand why things happen in a world that seem unfair,
Yeah.
right? So I think combining those, it's kind of like say the most powerful stories are poignant stories because they're both sweet and bitter.
Hmm.
A hard one to strike, but if you can get it right, that poignancy really I think can be very moving.
Yeah. It's finding something that um I like, it's the internal conflict. It's like, what's the character dealing with that actually matters? Like, yes, they're
Yes,
fighting the bad guy, and yes, they're
right.
on the adventure, but what are they dealing with on the inside that makes you able to connect with them, of like, man, I deal with something like that too, you know?
Right, right. Because there's a degree in all of us of conflict, right?
Hmm.
We're conflicted as people. We want to do right, but maybe in doing right, it brings up another issue. And what is that issue? And that's where things get interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. And then if you can start connecting, the main character and the side characters and all of their internal conflicts start
Right,
competing,
right,
then you really get some fun stuff happening.
right. Well, then you have a world, right?
Yeah,
That's what in fantasy you have a world, and
yeah,
it starts to become enriched. Yeah.
for sure. So, let's move into influences.
Yes.
So, who, what do you like to read? Where did some of your favorite authors, what's really impacted you over?
Just like when you're talking, Brendan, about the movies seem a little flat these days.
Hmm.
They're lacking something. Again, I draw back. I went through this voracious reading period when I was about fifth grade, and I went from I don't remember hardly reading a book before then.
Hmm.
Suddenly, I discovered the library. I read the entire series of Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators, and these three kids I still remember the characters' names, but one of the kids, he's a fat kid, and I know we probably shouldn't say the word fat anymore, but in the book, he was a fat kid, and it was Jupiter Jones.
Hmm.
And he was overweight and he was a brainiac. He was super smart, and his father owned a junkyard, right? And it was just awesome to me. Like, I could just relate to this kid. I just thought, he's relatable, he's smart, but he's maybe not the kid at school. And he had two friends and over the years, there was a little trailer that they kind of lost track of in the junkyard. His uncle, and so the kids had maneuvered all this junk around it until it became invisible. And then they made like a tube that went into this, so no one even knew this trailer was back there anymore. And that became their headquarters. And in this series, these kids somehow had a relationship with Alfred Hitchcock. They had befriended him, and when
Hmm.
they would get so far in adventure, they'd say, "Let's go ask him." And they would go talk to Alfred Hitchcock, and he would say, "Well, maybe you need to look into X, Y, and Z." And oh my God, I was just enthralled by this series.
Yeah.
Alfred Hitchcock, and it was the mystery of the green ghost, and the mystery of the scared cat, and the mystery of the this. And I just after that, I started reading Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the
Hmm.
Giant Peach, from the mixed up files of Mrs. Franken. I don't remember these fantastical stories of kids on an adventure.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really created that desire for me to kind of recreate that in the book that I wrote.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this will so I laugh a lot. I text I have four brothers, so I we have a rambunctious text
Oh,
group
that
that
must be
we
fun.
yeah.
Yes.
But I was texting them the other day, and I said, "You know what? We were totally doomed." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "So I'm between the ages of 9 and 13 for
Yes.
me. We had the Harry Potter books and movies came out. We
Yeah.
had the Star Wars prequels came out,
Oh my
the
goodness.
X-Men movies. We had Pokemon got created and started, and
Yes.
like all of the Lord of the Rings movies came out. Like all this stuff happened in my most formative years, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, it's no wonder I'm a big nerd because I just couldn't
Right.
avoid it, you know?
No, why would you leave those years behind? That's
Right.
like a potpourri of rich content,
Hmm.
right? Right.
Yeah. That's cool. So have you ever looked into those authors? How do I say this? Have looking into those authors, maybe writing processes, affect your own? Like, have you, looked into how they wrote some of their books and then adopted any of that, or anything like that?
Yeah, I've looked a little bit just out of more not to emulate him, but just out of curiosity. Like, how did
Hmm.
that happen? C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
Hmm.
was an interesting, almost Christian portal
Hmm.
kind of story. I was reading about his background. There's a movie out now. I want to really see it where he talks to Freud, I think. It's weird. So I guess they were
Oh, I think I've
contemporaries.
seen a trailer for that. That looks interesting.
Yeah, it does look really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's the classically trained minds
Hmm.
from different perspectives, right? From maybe a humanistic and a Christian perspective going at each other. So I just love these kinds of interplays, right? It's interesting. But his process was, I think he didn't really start writing until he was in his 40s. So there you go, Brendan.
Yeah.
And but it does seem like with all these authors, there is a prolific period
Hmm.
where material comes through and it's more accessible. And I don't know what happens if people, J.K. Rowling, I mean, does she have it in her to go back and write another 7 of those? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and I think there's a moment where you're in the hot white light of publicity where there's an appetite for your stuff. All those things the planets have to align.
Hmm.
But I can't say that I went away with anything other than if it's coming to you, make good, make hay while the sun is shining.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reading a book that's kind of some history of Tolkien, and C.S. Lewis is obviously mentioned in there quite a bit. Um,
Yeah.
I like reading stuff like that. Again, not so much to emulate, but it helps me with um, like he wrote The Lord of the Rings while also going through a bunch of normal life things too, you
I
know?
can only imagine.
So,
Usually it's like loss of a child or there's these things you
mhm,
go, "Oh my god, how did they do it?" I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you read these stories and
yeah.
there could be all kinds of life events.
J.K. Rowling, she was a single mother and she's just doing anything. She had like no money and she's just doing
Yeah.
everything she can to try to get this
Yeah.
idea out of her. And actually, really interesting. I think you probably know this, but I was reading about in this book about Tolkien. He talks about so he fought in World War I
Uh-huh.
and he was in the trenches and he got trench fever and they
Yeah.
sent him home to recover and he recovered right at the end of the war, so he never recovered before the war ended. So it's kind
Yeah.
of that crazy, I wonder if he would have got sent back, would he have been able to write the book?
Yeah, or would have been traumatized to the point where, it wouldn't happen. I don't know. Those
Yeah.
are
Like he
those are
like
all the Yeah.
he experienced like just enough of it
Yes.
to really inform what he was doing.
Yes, yes. I think there has to be some life experience for us to draw from.
Mhm.
I think, that's why most people don't write the great novel at 18. There has to be you have to see some of these things and experience these touch points for them to reverberate. So I think there is a degree of authenticity that comes through when people go through experiences like he did.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. So kind of moving from process and stuff, so what kind of tools do you use? Do you write in a notebook? Do you use a piece of software? Do you write it on all over the place? Like how do you what's your
A
kind of
little bit. Yeah, a little bit. I have a notebook. I wish I could say it was only one, but it usually ends up if I can't find it, I'll write it somewhere else. But I try to keep bringing it back to one or two notebooks. What I do is ask a lot of questions. So I don't write ideas like this is what's going to happen. I
Mhm,
write, is it true? Do you think so I'm almost put myself in the reader's perspective of if I was this far in the story, what would I be wondering?
mhm.
Right? Which is different than, boy, I've got to think of what happens next. Again, that's writer's block and pressure, and it's all up to you. But if
Yeah.
you look at the stories coming through you, you invite the story to unfold and you go, I wonder at this point, maybe he isn't this, maybe it's more this.
Yeah.
So I dedicate my book to this sense of wonderment. I think it was Socrates that said, wonder is the beginning of wisdom.
Hmm.
And I dedicate my book to all who wonder. So I think wonder is the fundamental component of how I write. I wonder, and then
Yeah.
I let that wonderment take hold and then explore and then go, oh, I bet this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I've never really thought about it that way, but it makes a lot of sense. The times where I've done best with writing a specific part or outlining something has been when I've been asking questions as opposed to being like, I have to decide what's next.
Right,
You know?
right,
It's like maybe I
right.
don't have to decide. Maybe I just need to say, well, what and some of my I think best ideas definitely have come from, like so for me, I kind of started my series in one spot, but then I ended up being like, well, how did we get here? So actually I went backwards. I was
Right.
like, well, if
That's a
we
great way.
yeah, if we got here by this, well, how did that get there? Like I just kept
Yeah,
going,
yeah,
backward. And then I did end up going forwards too, but
yeah. There's an old show, and it's really, I'm going to date myself, it was Columbo, but he was an investigator, and he would always ask these people that were, you knew they're from the, you knew from the opening scene who was guilty.
mhm,
And they'd always cover their crime perfectly. And Columbo was this bumbling kind of idiot kind of guy. He had a trench coat, smoked an old stogie.
mhm,
And just when these people thought, he would stop at the door and he goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, just one more question. And it'd always be like, how did the dirt from your boots get in the, and it would just be, he would just keep asking those annoying little nagging questions. And when you would explore them, it would end up unraveling the person's testimony.
yeah.
And I thought that's a marvelous device.
Yeah. It's more like being a detective than
Yes,
writing, you're
your own
just
story.
mhm. That's really
Yeah.
cool. So, let's maybe go back to the quality versus quantity thing,
Hmm.
but specifically asking about I mentioned this in the email before about the use of AI.
Yeah.
So, AI has become a really big thing, and I think everyone's really exploring how to use it, and I think, um but with the quality versus quantity, I think it's going to allow people to write a huge volume of things. But I
Yeah.
would also ask the question. I'd ask two questions. The first question would be, did you actually write them? Can you
Hmm.
actually put your name on it? Because if you did
Yeah.
most of it with AI, and then the second question would be, I don't know if does something like The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or one of these massive classic, zeitgeist things, is that ever going to be created by an AI? And I don't
Yeah.
think that it is. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, that's such a great question. And of course, I don't see how it could either until if it happens, then you go, I didn't know that. They're starting to say, I don't see there's a corollary right now in literature, but they're saying that some of these paintings they're creating are looking like masterpieces.
Hmm.
Um, I think there is a spark of consciousness that's just lacking. Think of it this way. Here's a great one. What if you just totally programmed a clone who looked really human and they just gave really good answers? Brendan, how are you today, Brendan? You look like you're worried. And you go, well, I do feel a little worried. I'm surprised you noticed that.
Hmm.
Well, I am very concerned about you. There'd be something, I don't know how to explain it, but you would just detect on some level. Yeah, I watched this show the other day about going to space, and they're saying to keep people from going crazy, they might put clones on there or droids or androids or something that can talk to people. But I think,
Hmm.
could you?
You
You on some level,
you would
wouldn't
know. You'd always
you? Yeah.
know. Yeah.
And I think there's always going to be a tell with AI. I don't know exactly what it is.
Hmm.
I think there will always be a tell. Having said that, I'm thought I would just absolutely this is horrible, and AI has no place in writing. Not that it won't overtake everything anyway, but I will say I think it does have one. It makes a wonderful executive assistant.
Yes.
So if you could say AI, I'm thinking that this happened in Europe, but I don't know a lot about this subject. Inform me. So how would AI be any different than if you had a paid assistant who went off, talked to the reference librarian, brought back all these notes that you drew upon
Hmm.
for your story? But I'm not going to tell AI to write my story because the genesis of that story, I think, comes from the unmanifest.
Hmm.
And I don't think AI has access to that.
No, I don't think so either. And I think too, there's people still, I think, want to connect with a creator of something. So,
Yes.
back to Tolkien, it's like I love the Lord of the Rings, but I also like the person of Tolkien and studying who
Yes.
he was.
Yes.
Brandon Sanderson's a great example. I like his books, but also I'm very interested in
Where
him
did
as a
these come from?
yeah, him as a person. How did he create? We're having this
Right.
conversation because I'm interested in like how did you come up with this?
Yeah.
So I still think that people want that connection to.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking about C.S. Lewis.
Mhm,
Was he, what was his mind? What is the mind of somebody who creates this? And he wrote metaphorically about, I think, in a lot of ways about the Christian faith. So was he super devout or was he just kind of expansive? Or you want to know more?
mhm.
Where did this story come from? So I think that's a natural inclination that would be, I think, missing a little devoid with AI written materials.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think people will always be able to tell. Like you'll be
Yeah.
reading the book and you'll be like, just is missing something. Like it just
Something,
doesn't.
and it might even be those quirks, Brendan, that you're talking about when you were writing your own planned, see, AI planned, methodical, right?
Mhm,
So you were writing this story and you interrupt your own writing process with what?
right.
You said you were writing your own plan. You have a destination, you're going down it. And as you're driving down this thing and you're writing this thing, your eye catches something interesting on a side street.
Mhm,
And what do you do because you're a conscious, sentient person? You're curious. You wonder, going back to wonderment, and you put your turn signal on and you take a detour.
mhm.
I think that's the kinds of things that we recognize that are innately human that might not be innately AI.
Yeah. Well, and even about, you're writing in an internal conflict or internal emotions for a character. It's like, can an AI really? Maybe eventually it can. I don't think it can right
Yeah,
now. So it's,
yeah,
I've experienced sadness, I've experienced anger, I've experienced those emotions, so I can
yeah.
then accurately put them into a character. Well, an AI can't feel any of that. So can it really, embody what that is?
I think it can emulate the language and get close to where they use these words. But here's an example. I think that's very relatable. Supposedly, when people have kind of a savant-like minds,
Hmm.
they're kind of missing that social interaction piece. They're just like huge. They're almost like an AI. They're information machines. There was supposedly this one kid I was reading about some time back but he wasn't linear in that he only knew baseball. I mean, he just had several lanes that he knew deeply all this information. And they said if you were to interact with this kid at a cocktail party, at first you'd think you met the most interesting international kind of, avant-garde kind of person. But after conversations and he pivoted and talked deeply on 5 or 6 subjects, that glue that takes you from what the segues, the human interaction going from one information set to another, were kind of missing.
Hmm.
And you'd start picking up that I'm just basically talking to an encyclopedia,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's missing that personal touch. I've been
It's that glue. Yeah.
yeah. I've been experimenting with it, as you mentioned, more like in a research assistant.
Yeah.
But for me, because mine is a complete fantasy world. One of the things I've
Yeah.
been messing with is, so on ChatGPT, you can create a custom version. So you can basically give it its own information and tell it to only use that. So
Yeah.
I've been kind of experimenting with giving it like, these are my outlines, these are some of my character descriptions, here's some of this and that. And I gave it very specific rules. So, like, it's not allowed to write anything, and it's not allowed to give me any suggestions or create anything at all because
Yeah.
I don't want any ideas from it.
Right.
But I can ask it questions about things I've already created.
Right. Your world. Am I consistent with my own world?
Right. So I can be like, hey, I forget this character's eye color, or what did this character do in chapter one?
Oh, see, that's marvelous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that to me is like, as long as it's because I want the creation to come from me. I don't want it, you
Yes.
know. So, but I think that's a use case that really works. But again, you got to be careful. You got to really give it those parameters so that because I don't
Right.
want it, I don't want any suggestions. Like I want to figure it out, and
I keep going back to open the pod bay doors, Hal.
yeah,
2001 Space Odyssey, you know?
yeah. It's
Yeah, yeah.
I what it's I told someone the other day about I was like, well, AI is gonna take over and destroy the world, but while we can use it, it's pretty cool.
Yes,
Yeah,
on our way there.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's really cool. So, as we kind of pull towards a close, so tell us about your book. One quick thing, I suppose. Maybe this isn't quick, but so how did you go from you finished the book, you are maybe in the editing process, and then the publishing. So did you self-publish this, I believe? Is that correct?
Yes, I self-published this, and I can get into that briefly if you want, but,
Yeah.
go ahead. Like,
Yeah, what
I'm an
so
I'm
kind
an
of what's
open
that
book.
process like? How did you self-publish it? Why did you decide to maybe go that direction? Um, because there's a lot of self-publishing is a lot easier now than it has ever been. There's so many
Yes.
ways you can do it. And so I guess maybe why did you make that decision? And then kind of what was that process like?
That's a great question. I would say there's currents in publishing. The current right now is not for my kind of book. It
Hmm.
just isn't. The appetite out there in the market. And I think, when I first taught soccer back when I was your age, I had a kid like you did, all the kids over pursued the ball. They were 4 years old. And the ball, you got to play your position. But all it was 10 or 11, 12 kids all bunched around the ball,
Hmm.
following it up and down the field. And right now there's a certain demo and target and a certain profile the publishing world wants. And everyone, in my estimation, is over pursuing it.
Hmm.
And it happened in TV. Everything's a Western, then everything's a cop show. Through the
Hmm.
decades, it would be nothing but Westerns, and then everybody's sick of them, and then we're doing nothing but cop shows.
Now
So
we're doing only superhero movies. you know?
only superhero,
Yeah.
and we're only doing remakes. So it it became apparent to me right away that what I was selling, there's an appetite for it. It's back to that Harry Potter fan, but everybody goes, "Oh, it's been done, so no one will ever want it again." It's like saying no kid will ever want a talking animal ever again in a kid's book. Well, yeah, they will, because kids love that. So I made a decision after I went to about 20 different literary reps, and I didn't get to the publisher because the literary reps, I got lots of nicely worded declines,
Hmm.
and which is typical. You're always going to get that. And remember too, when you're declined, it's not even your book. A lot of times people just don't do your genre.
Hmm.
I mean, don't go to somebody and you want them to represent again your mystery book when they're a romance. So you've got to find just the right agent. It's the times have to be right. So put your finger in there, wet your finger, put it in the air, and say, "Is this the right time for my book?" If it isn't, you need to wait or self-publish. I'm fortunate that I have a background in marketing,
Hmm.
so I didn't mind at all jumping into this because, from what I understand, even if you get published, you're largely on your own on the marketing. You don't get the big lift you got back in the day.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I also think there's an air right now of people really like being in control of their destiny
Yes.
and their
Yep.
creativity. And I mean, you even see that with
Keeping
like
your rights.
Brandon Sanderson's a great example of he's traditionally published, but he did those secret projects. I don't know what you know much about that, but
Yeah.
he's starting to publish stuff on his own, and he's a
Yeah.
big name author. And
Yeah.
he's still, I just was listening to his podcast, and he was talking about it, like being in control of the
Yep.
process, and not having that.
Owning your subscribers, don't send them all to Amazon. You never know them again. Like, how can you ever remind them or say hi? No, you don't get their email. You don't get anything.
Hmm.
So it's a longer haul, but if you can build your own audience
Yeah.
over the distance, it's really good. I used Reedsy. I think I'm saying, or Redsy, Reedsy, I think it is.
Yeah.
I use that for my editor.
Hmm.
I used ebook launch for my cover design. I used my former art director, so it was for the interior black and white illustration. So it was a collaborative
Hmm.
effort. And the beauty of it is you start developing your own community. Just like you wrote your virtual world, you start creating a physical world
Hmm.
of creators that will help mirror that. And there's something real special about that.
Yeah. Well, and we live in a world now where it's so easy for anyone to build an audience, you know.
Right.
I like my YouTube channel is a great example of like I'm not a published author. I'm not
Yeah.
I called it Writing Quest because I'm
Yeah.
on the quest to
Yeah.
do it.
Real time.
You know, it's real
Yes.
time. Like I've always said that. I've never, hidden that or tried to act like I was something that I'm not. That's what it is. And so, but and I've got a YouTube channel with almost 3,000 subscribers to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just a guy. Like I never
Yeah.
claim to like know what I'm talking about. I'm just interested and
And I'm sure
you know,
people love you. You'll get those ones who are like, "Oh, I just love your show. I listen to it." And you just go, "I'm me and I'm not into it that much."
yeah,
You're thinking, and yet you've got people that really buy into you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just a cool time to be able to be independent and um. So I just think it's really cool. I think it's cool that you
Yeah.
do that and um. Yeah. So about the collaborative process. Um. I mean, everything at some point ends up being collaborative. Did you what did you use to actually publish it? Like, what was the service? If
Okay, so for formatting, I think it's
hmm
ebook.com. If that's not it, it'll bring it up. It's really good people there. They've done like hundreds of books, but they have a formatting service. I think there's a program called Vellum or something where it'll do all the formatting and do it. I didn't want to put, you know what? You're going to be so divided when you write a book.
hmm
You've got to be a marketing hat and a technical hat and an editor hat and a proof. You got to figure out. It's almost like if you're doing your house. I'll do some of the things at my house, but I'm not doing the electric because I don't want to shock myself, or I
right,
don't want to do the plumbing. So for me, I didn't want to do formatting, so I sent that out. It was like 300 or 400 bucks.
right,
The cover was 5 or 6, 7, 800, somewhere in there. Now some of these you might go, ouch.
hmm
But you have to decide what are the touch points that you can do and manage, and what are the touch points you don't. So I hired an editor, and I hired her 3 times.
yeah,
She did a first draft, a structural one where she just cuts your heart out and leaves it laying on the floor
right,
pumping, and you have to spend another year on your book. And then the second one, which is more just sentence structure and da da da. And then the third one is it's like 400 grit sandpaper.
yeah,
This apostrophe was wrong on page 15, and it's tedious. I would say this: one step at a time.
hmm
Don't get overwhelmed. Give us this day our daily bread. Look at
yeah,
it. What can I do today to advance this project forward? And if you take one step every day towards your goal of writing a book, at the end of a year, you will have taken 365 steps.
hmm
That cumulative, slow progress, like you talked about earlier,
yeah,
right? Slow productivity. There's something to be said for that.
yeah, yeah. That's very cool. Well, this has been a very awesome and fun conversation, and I'm glad we were able to hook up and make it happen.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
Brendan, and I wish you the best. I will look forward to your works, and that
yeah.
they will come out in due season.
Yes, yes. Hopefully it will. I'm excited about that day. So tell us before we go, where can we find you? Do you have social media, website, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so if you just search Nemesis and the Vault of Lost Time, and there's already like 5 or 6 pages of stuff, but you can find me on Amazon, you can find me in Barnes and Noble, you can find me on, you can order it through your bookstore. I will say, if you want to be part of the community that I'm growing, go to pjdavisauthor.com and you can join my newsletter. I won't bombard you. I think I've sent out one so far. PJ Davis Author. I do plan on writing a second, third book. You can leave comments and you can write me, PJ Author, at gmail.com if you want to just reach out to me.
Awesome. And I'll put the links for all that in the description of this video and all that stuff. So
That would be awesome.
yeah. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for watching. This has been Writing Quest, and we'll see you next time.